In this section, we'll be taking a closer look at the in-out tools, more specifically the tools that enable us to connect to data sources, as well as output data in a variety of formats for onward consumption. For example, we'll be observing how we can connect to Excel and CSV files, as well as connecting to databases. On the flip side, we will also explore different output options, such as outputting to Excel, as well as sending data back to a database. We will also observe how we can output data to visualization software such as Tableau, which allows us to create efficient visualizations. Now, if you've not covered databases in a lot of detail or used Tableau before, don't worry, I will try to make it as clear as possible so that you can follow along easily. If you do have database experience or you've enrolled in my SQL Bootcamp and my Tableau course, you can actually use what you've learnt in these courses to easily control the flow of data between Alteryx, a database, and visualization tools such as Tableau, which can be combined to create some very dynamic solutions. So let's take a look at arguably one of the most important and popular tools in Alteryx, known as input data. Now we can connect to so many different data sources by using the range of inbuilt data connectors that Alteryx has. So let's first of all drag an input tool onto the canvas. Now once we do this, the configuration pane asks us to do one simple thing. It asks us to connect to a file or database, and we can do this by selecting the drop-down arrow here. Now to begin with, we're going to connect to two files, one being an Excel file and one being a CSV file. However, you can see from the list of options below that we can also connect to other files such as JSON files, Microsoft Access databases, ClickView files, as well as Google Earth files. So we have a large list of options when establishing a connection to a file. So let me first of all navigate to the Excel file that I've put together for this simple demonstration called Store. Once I've selected the Excel file of choice, you can see that it's prompting me to select a sheet in which the data resides. Now, seeing as I have two tabs of data in my Excel file, one called Employees and one called Store, I'm getting both in the drop-down list. If I were to have another 20 tabs of data, then I would see this list grow by 20 items. In this example, I'm going to select Employees to see the employees' data. Now, one thing to note here is that you will need to ensure the Excel file you're trying to open is not open elsewhere. If it's open elsewhere, Alteryx will present you with a little error message stating that it's unable to open and read the file. In this instance, simply close the Excel file wherever it's open and re-establish the connection. Once the connection has been established, you will see a few configuration options in the top half, as well as a preview of the first 100 records in the bottom half. Now, seeing as I only have 10 records in this dataset, we are seeing the full picture. Now, the dataset I'm using is clean, with column headers above the data, with the data presented in rows and columns. However, if you're working with data which has no headers, you can select the option which tells Alteryx that the first row contains data. When I do this and hit refresh, you can see that my column headers now become part of the dataset, and the column names have been replaced with F1 to F6, which simply stands for Field 1, Field 2, and so on. Now, we can use other tools to rename these columns if we need to, but this will be covered in the preparation section. In this example, the first row doesn't contain data as it represents our column names, so we'll deselect this option and hit refresh. The next option we may need to use is the Start Data Import Online option. Now, if your data set in Excel is clean, then you will not be using this option much. But let's say that your data starts on row 3, for example. You can change this to 3 and the first 2 records in your Excel file will be ignored. So here if I typed 3, row 3 becomes the headers and row 4 onwards is where the data import starts from. If I were to also select first row contains data, then row 3 would also be part of the data and would not be regarded as the column headers. Now, what we have just configured here is the general configuration settings, which is denoted by the little cog symbol. But we have a few more settings which we can observe. Firstly, we have the navigation option, which shows us which tools are connected to the tool in question. Now, this is very useful to see when we have multiple tools connected, but seeing as we haven't connected anything to it yet, the view is blank. Now, a really useful option available to us is the annotation box, which for me is extremely important to use when attempting to construct easy to follow workflows. So seeing as this tool is being used to input employee data, we will type employee input data. When I click on the canvas, you can see that the annotation underneath the input tool updates, and it's easy to see exactly what this tool is doing. Now we have connected to the data, let's use the Browse tool to analyze it in more detail. Now we can do this by right-clicking on the tool and selecting Add Browse After, which will connect a Browse tool to the right-hand side. When I then run the workflow by clicking on the blue Run button, you can see that the workflow successfully completes in 0.8 seconds. So first things first, if I select the canvas, you will see that we are taken to the messages of the workflow, which tells us the status of the last run. So here we can see that there are 0 errors, 0 conversion errors, and 0 warnings. The run started at 18:59 and 39 seconds and inputted data from this file location. The Browse tool observed 10 records, and it finishes by telling us that the workflow run in 0.8 seconds. Now obviously this is a very small workflow which is not doing anything useful as of yet, but when we add more tools to the canvas, it becomes a very useful piece of feedback for us. Now if I click on the Browse button, we can see that the data appears in the results window, and if I select the metadata tab just next to where it says data, we can see information pertaining to the data itself. For example, we can see the name of the fields, the data type that each field has, its size, as well as the file path to the file we have connected to. Now just for completeness, if you wanted to copy the data in the results window into Excel, you can do so by copying the results to the clipboard with either the headers included or not included. Secondly, you can export the results to a file by selecting the little save icon. This can either save all the records in the results pane, or you're able to select specific rows from the results pane to export. Thirdly, we can open results in a new window by selecting this icon here. And lastly, we can revert changes or add tools to the workflow, but more on this later. Now within the Browse tool configuration window, we're able to analyze each field to observe different bits of information. For example, data quality issues, or even statistics about numeric fields such as the average or the standard deviation. So at the moment on screen, we can see the profile of the ID field. But if I were to come down to the results window and select on job title, which we know is a text field, we can quickly see that an accountant is the most popular job title with a count of 3, sales has a count of 2, and the rest have a count of 1. If I scroll down in the configuration window, we can see data quality checks, which tells us that this field is actually 100% okay, i.e. it does not have any null or empty values. We can see that the shortest job title is 2 characters, which is IT. The longest value is customer services with 17 characters, and there are 7 unique values that appear within this column. So straight away we can get a feel for the quality of data before proceeding with the next step of the workflow, whatever that may be. Now if I click on a field with a numeric data type such as salary, we're able to see the profile of the salary by record ID, giving us an indication of the spread of data. We can see that the minimum salary is $24,000, with the maximum being $65,000. The average salary is $41,500, and the standard deviation is just over $12,240. So we can obtain a nice picture about the salary of the employees from this Browse tool output. Okay, so moving on to our second example, we will now connect to a CSV file which I've obtained from Kaggle, and I've included it in the resources section if you wanted to connect to the same dataset. A CSV file is simply a text file which has each of the values in it separated by a comma, which is also known as a delimiter. So once again we will drag an input data tool onto the canvas. We will select the file we want to connect to, in this case it's the Spotify dataset in CSV format. Once the connection is established, we get a few configuration options at the top, as well as a preview of the first 100 records underneath. Now note here that the configuration options for a CSV file are different from the configuration options for the Excel file. Now this is to be expected as different file formats will require different considerations. Now one of the most used options when connecting to a CSV file will be the delimiter, as your text file may separate values using a different delimiter such as a semicolon as opposed to a comma. In this example you would then need to change the comma in this box to a semicolon. Now once we've populated our configuration options, we can add a Browse tool afterwards to observe the data in more detail. Now when I run the workflow, you can see that it completes in 0.9 seconds, but this time we're getting feedback that there are 11 field conversion errors. Now this is nothing to be alarmed about, but we'll take a look to see what they are. In the messages section, we can see that the conversion errors are appearing because the field called weeks charted was truncated in 11 records within the dataset. Now this basically means that some text within this field has been chopped off, which wouldn't help if we needed this field for our analysis purposes, so we could extend the size of the data type to ensure that no truncation occurs. Other than this, it appears the data was successfully loaded and the Browse tool has observed 1,556 records. Now just note here that conversion errors and warnings are there to alert you that something is not quite operating as expected. Now this doesn't mean your workflow will break. In fact, you can merely observe the warnings and decide whether you want to proceed or not. Errors, on the other hand, will need to be fixed in order for your workflow to work in its entirety. So let's take a quick look at some of the information in the Spotify dataset. If I click on the Streams field, we can see that it's populated fully. However, we can also see that it's come through as a string data type. So maybe we would want to change this when we perform some cleansing on the data. If we were to look at the artist followers, we can once again see that it's feeding through as a string data type, but this time 0.7% of the fields are empty. Now throughout the course, we will continue to explore little tips and tricks we can adopt to help us analyze and navigate the data. But for now, simply note that we can input data by connecting to files from a variety of data sources, and we can configure the tools to bring back the data accordingly. The Browse tool is useful to assess data quality, as well as seeing specific statistics on each field. In the coming videos, we will observe ways of sourcing data across multiple worksheets or files efficiently, as well as connecting to databases.